Do we get going? So, good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. Welcome to this week's Monday Assembly. I've just got just over 30 seconds until we get cracking. And this week's session, we've got the Leuven course. So if anyone doesn't know, this was the course for last year's UCI World Championships. The Road World Championships, that is. And RGT built it in celebration of that event. And also, obviously, we've had a run of Belgian classics. Amstel Gold, is that a Belgian classic? I don't think it is. It's Dutch, isn't it? Because Maastricht is in Holland. Yeah, it's like a little enclave where Holland and sort of seeps into Belgium, I think. Anyway, this isn't meant to be a geography test. But yeah, that's where we're riding today. So as normal, guys, we've got the rubber banding effect on. Or at least we should do. So yeah, I'll just be putting around about 2 watts per kilo, or potentially less as I get more and more talkative. But the idea with these sessions, guys, if you are new to the Monday assembly rides, it's basically get what you want out of it. So you can ride really easy and ride it as easy as you want, or you can be on the front and really push it on if you want to. I mean, Leuven, this circuit is a pretty challenging circuit in places. You know, some of the climbs are very short and punchy. So if you wanted to, you can work on your short duration power up those hills. A lot of people, though, like this ride as a bit of an active recovery session, and they just like to sit back and listen to my dulcet tones as they relax into their Monday evening. I didn't get any abuse. That's shocking. That means they're probably not listening. So guys, if you want to get involved with the chat tonight, we're discussing multi-sport training programs, so triathlon, duathlon. For any pure cyclists, don't run. Okay, don't get scared. A lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is extremely relevant to you guys as well. There's kind of one key difference which I'll talk about when it comes to approaching cycling as opposed, approaching triathlon as opposed to cycling plans. But otherwise, there's a lot of key advice to cyclists in here as well. You'll know with the bits where you can zone out. But otherwise, I think the vast majority of it should be pretty helpful for all involved. Hopefully, looks like a pretty decent turnout tonight. Normally, whenever we cover anything triathlon related, viewing figures plummet. Triathletes are a particular breed of animal. And I know there's a fierce rivalry between cyclists and triathletes generally. Anyway, so guys, if you want to get involved with that discussion, for those on Zoom, of course, you can unmute yourself and ask away at any point. Feel very free to interrupt me, or you can use the Zoom chat, or if you're on RGT, you can use the RGT chat. I've actually got it working. It seems to vary week to week whether the remote app works for me. I'm sure there's a system, but I don't know it. And then for anybody watching the live stream, you can, of course, leave your comments in the comment section of the live stream, and I've got those up as well, so I'll hopefully pick those up. So yeah, a variety of ways you can contribute to the discussion, guys. As I say, what I'm mostly going to be talking about are the complications related to a multi-sport training plan. Just one quick piece of admin. So there won't be one of these sessions next week, guys, just FYI. In the UK, it's Easter, bank holiday. So I'll be having a bit of a break / probably just doing other work. So yeah, there's no Monday ride next week. There is a Tuesday. There will still be a Tuesday and a Wednesday session though. So if you are new to these sessions, guys, quick FYI, we also run 2 other weekly sessions. This is our Monday group ride, pretty chilled, lots of coaching chat. Tuesday is our strength and conditioning workshop. At the moment, we are going through a total workout series designed specifically for endurance athletes, but basically short and sharp. And then on Wednesdays, our current series is what we call the Discovery series, and that's our Wednesday evening session is our structured live coach group workout, usually pretty high intensity, and we've just got a few weeks left of that series. So those are the three weekly sessions we run. All the details are on our website, on the RIAK online page. Otherwise, let's just settle in, shall we? And enjoy a nice little group ride. I do like this circuit. So VCN, our streaming partners, recently ran sort of the VCN Champs, and this was one of the courses they used. It was, punchy. Yeah, it got climbs of sort of 400 to 600 meters. I think the longest one is about a K. So it's a pure sort of anaerobic and VO2 max type power on these climbs. If you're going full gas, that is. Just remember, guys, those that are on RGT, if you want an easier time with it, you can turn the trainer difficulty down if you've got a smart trainer. So to do that, you can go to the sensors menu in RGT, top right hand corner, you'll see a trainer difficulty display, and you can just turn that right down if you want to, and basically what that will do, your trainer will then simulate a perfectly flat course, and then you can just kind of judge your own effort. Okay, so that's what I'm doing at the moment, so I can kind of keep my effort measurable, and so I can actually talk. But as I say, guys, use this session for what you want. Nice, easy zone 2 mileage, active recovery, or a smash fest if you want. Whatever you want, basically. Okay. So, let's get cracking, shall we? So, we're talking about multi-sport training plans, guys. This evening, as I say, don't run away if you're a cyclist. Plenty of information for you, as well as for triathletes and duathletes. And obviously, we've had a few weeks talking about training plans. So, if this is your first session kind of watching, guys, we have recently covered training plans in two respects. We did a sort of a coach's guide to building a basic training plan, and then we recently talked about rider profiling, which also feeds into a well built training plan. Basically, rider profiling, for anyone that didn't come to that session, is about working out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and we recommend doing the same for a triathlete, but of course across different disciplines. Okay, just a few things to kind of remind you of, though. It doesn't matter whether it's cycling or multi-sport, whatever the plan is, it needs to have the right ratio of high intensity to low intensity endurance training. So that's coming back to that sort of very rough 80-20 rule. That's based on the macro researcher, a guy called Stephen Seiler. Okay, so if you Google him, you'll be able to find his papers on it, and there's various books sort of rehashing his findings. So yeah, roughly looking for about 80% of your total training to be low intensity, and then around 20% high intensity. Obviously, not every week has to be the same, not every week has to be 80% to 20%, but we're talking kind of on a block by block basis, or just a kind of overarching picture. You want to try and adhere to that 80-20 rule. And then just some other kind of reminders of the basics. When it comes to our approach, we employ a slightly different model to the traditional model. We don't tend to work in sort of building or loading and unloading weeks. We tend to work in sort of 3 to 4 day cycles. Every 3 to 4 days, some form of recovery. so that we're constantly chipping away at that fatigue rather than getting to a stage where we desperately need a full rest week. Obviously, you still need some weeks that are lower in terms of loading just to freshen up a little bit and to give yourself a bit of a mental break more than anything. But we don't want to forget what it feels like to feel fresh, which tends to be kind of having that 3 to 4 week approach of loading for 2 or loading for 3 and then unloading. That for us, that doesn't make sense. You need recovery when you need recovery, and that's why we work in short little cycles, 3 to 4 days, and then some recovery. Okay, so that's kind of like the very basic structure that we sort of recommend in terms of any training plan. And then of course, once you kind of got the principles of your plan laid down, you can then start to talk bigger picture. Okay, that's where we come to the macro plan, which anyone that joined our basic training plan session, your macro plan is basically your overarching plan, your season plan, or potentially multi-season plan, depending on your objectives. Now, this is where things can be very different for cyclists and triathletes. So for cyclists, when I'm talking about cyclists, I'm talking about those that, you know, either they race a lot, you know, either e-racing or the local race circuit, local racing scene, and tend to race a lot. And so their macro plan, it's really hard to build in a specific peak, and this is often because anyone that does a lot of bike racing, cycling calendar is, I think the euphemistic way of putting it is, it's a bit of an enigma. You can't always be sure if you'll make the start list or not, and so it makes it very hard, and that's whether you get selected basically to race. There's all kinds of different things amok in bike racing, politics, dynamics between local clubs, etc, etc, and so yeah, particularly as you go up the categories, sometimes you can enter an event and then not be sure if you're even on the start list. Yeah, which is odd. Won't go into that one. That is the makings of an hour-long rant. Yeah, so it makes it quite hard, really. I find building macro plans for cyclists much harder than building them for triathletes. The main thing to say about macro plans for cyclists, you have to be very adaptable, basically. And it can be hard to maintain a grasp of the big picture when it comes to a macro plan for a cyclist, because it does often involve a lot of changing. With a cycling plan though, week to week training tends to be much simpler than for a triathlete, and it's much easier to kind of have a specific focus on a weekly basis. So for instance, this week or this 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to emphasize anaerobic power. So you still kind of hit all the different spectrum of workouts, but you put more emphasis on the anaerobic sessions, and then perhaps drop back on the other ones. Quite a lot simpler to do that for a cyclist. And so whilst the macro plan might be chaos, the week to week focus can be much easier to manage. With multi-sport plans, so triathletes and duathletes, the macro plan tends to be quite simple. It's the week to week where the chaos is. So for a triathlete, typically they're preparing for either 1 or 2 specific events. Okay, and so that means their macro plan, their overarching plan, can be quite straightforward. You've basically got 1 or 2 peaks in your season, and everything's building towards that, and you kind of fit everything in and around that structure. Now, I often get asked, how many times can you peak in a season? Generally speaking, for a proper peak, you're talking probably twice in a season. And that's simply because then recover from that peak, or do that big event, then recover, and then build again. there's a big kind of lag period. Okay, so if we're talking Ironman, for example, which is kind of what I'm most familiar with, and most of my athletes tend to be sort of long course triathletes. For them, recovery from an Ironman, you're talking at least 6 weeks. Full recovery, at least 6 weeks. It devastates you. Your muscles will recover in a matter of days, but your cardiovascular system takes a hammering, your immune system takes a battering, you do kind of micro tear damage to soft tissue. And so for a long course triathlete, it takes a long time to recover. So you can quickly see how that would have a knock-on effect. You might not necessarily take 6 weeks completely off training, but that's 6 weeks with very low expectations, basically. And so then you can see, if your season is only, I don't know, let's say June to the end of September, and you're talking Ironman events, quickly that becomes quite compressed. And so you physically just cannot build, peak, recover more than twice typically in a season. Okay, which does keep things relatively simple for triathletes. Sorry, 2 seconds, guys. Just checking on the live feed. Yeah, here's my phone, thankfully. Just saw a very frozen me going like this. I was like, oh god, is the stream gone down? Just my phone. Anyway, yes, so back to multi-sport plans. The macro plan tends to be relatively straightforward. Okay, you got these 2 big events, 1 or 2 big events, and everything else marshals around that. As I said earlier, it's the week to week where things get complicated, and that's simply because there's so many more variables to consider on a weekly basis when it comes to a triathlete as opposed to a cyclist. One really ridiculous one is I find a lot of our training is simply dictated by when the pools are open. Okay, that again is the starting point of another hour-long rant. But ever since COVID, getting in the pool has just been made significantly more difficult. Before, the pools are open for like lane swimming 3 or 4 hours. This is the UK, by the way. Pools are open 3 or 4 hours in the morning. Go whenever you want. Get your session done. Go home. Now with the whole having to book a specific time, you can basically guarantee every session is going to be rammed with other people, and it all just makes it so much harder. Having to be there at exactly the same time, can't get in until a certain time, blah blah blah. So yeah, I find silly little things like that make my life and athletes' lives so much more complicated. And then of course, as soon as you add in running, that makes life very complicated as well, because running is actually quite a high risk sport, which is odd considering if you think about our evolution. I don't want to get into arguing about evolution if there's any Americans on here. Sorry. We evolved from apes to standing upright. We're built to run, basically. We're built for long, low intensity running on soft rolling ground. And that's just kind of what our physiology is for. But the way we kind of tend to train it's just a very high risk process, basically. Yeah, that's a conversation for another time, I think, 'cause that's a whole session's discussion on how to avoid injury when ramping running. But yeah, running in particular, it throws in so many different variables. Trying to space out runs as much as possible, trying to manage intensity very carefully, trying to manage the surfaces on which you perform each type of intensity, etc, etc. Yeah, it gets very, very complicated. And I know a lot of cyclists like to incorporate a bit of running, and I definitely advise it for cross training. So guys, if you are a pure cyclist, one big reason why you want to do strength training and you want to maybe do a bit of running is to basically bulletproof you as you get older. Because the problem is, if you're just doing kind of low impact sports like cycling, you get very well developed muscles, etc. Cardiovascular system improves, but you also you don't put the same stresses on your bones and your joints. Your bones are tissue; they adapt, okay, and they become more dense if they're subjected to impact. So if you're just a pure cyclist, as you get older, it is quite common to develop bone-related issues because you haven't subjected yourself to impact that would otherwise keep those bones nice and healthy. Yeah, as you get older, basically, your bones thin a little bit over time, so you get more risk to like osteoporosis and things like that. So I think just general life advice really is you need a certain amount of impact in your training, just to make sure that you're kind of looking after your body as a whole. Another thing cyclists sometimes struggle with are Achilles issues. Okay, you often see it, and there is one pro cyclist that always comes to mind when I think about this. I won't mention the name, but she was a pro cyclist, ended her career as a cyclist, and suddenly decided she wanted to become a triathlete. Her Achilles exploded within weeks of starting her training, and that's simply because the way your ankle joint, etc., behaves in cycling is very different in running. Your Achilles it plays a very different role, and normally with cycling, you're not dropping your heel through the full range and things like that, which is not what we want. But basically, what it comes down to is the cyclists often you can get a shortening of the Achilles, and that's why when they then go and try and run, the little thing explodes. So yeah, a little bit of an aside, but yeah, if you're a cyclist, you might want to start thinking about a bit of multi-sport. Not necessarily to race, but in terms of your training, a bit of cross-training. There's very well-founded reasons why cross-training is a good idea. Right, just finding myself off the back here. Just going to speed up a little bit. Try and get onto them. Yes, okay. So when it comes to, because of that complication in terms of week to week, it can be a little bit hard to provide generalizations for a good multi-sport plan, because they tend to be very athlete or event driven. The one common feature I would suggest, and I suggested this in our basic training plan chat, is have key weeks in your training plan, guys. Okay, those are where you basically, well, not necessarily block out your calendar, but prioritize certain weeks in the build up to an event. And they're usually the high volume weeks where you prioritize your training, and this all helps to make you feel prepared for your event. You could even go on a little training camp, go somewhere nice, spend a week swimming, cycling, running and strength training, and that being your main focus. It really does make a big difference in terms of confidence. That's just one important feature in any kind of training plan, really. In terms of what not to include, in terms of a macro plan for a multi-sport athlete, your macro plan shouldn't be just one big ramp up to an event. Okay, that's perhaps one of the things we see in off the peg training plans, because they can't be tailored. They tend to focus on kind of building to an event, ensuring you've got the baseline fitness, but are not tailored to you as an individual. So yeah, your training plan shouldn't just be one big build up to a specific event. It should be more nuanced than that, really. However, there is one kind of off the peg training plan that you might want to consider before you start building towards a race. And that's one that kind of figures out what your strengths and weaknesses are. So basically what we were talking about, was it last week or the week before? Right, yeah, last week, rider profiling, but doing it across 4 disciplines. Well, 3, and then strength as well as the 4th discipline, in our opinion. But creating a bit of a profile for yourself. And of course, we've got a customary plug. So we do have profiling plans on our website. Rider profiling and athlete profiling. And basically what those plans are, they're only 6 weeks long, and they're designed to help you build a picture of who you are as an athlete. And it really, in my opinion, it's only once you've got that clear idea of who you are and where you need to develop, only then can you build a plan that properly reflects what it is you want to achieve. And so once you've done that, you need to make sure that whatever macro plan you build, it flows and it has a particular emphasis at different times, focusing in on any weaknesses. And of course that depends on the athlete. But yeah, it's much more nuanced than the sort of traditional triathlon plan model, which is you do your big long miles at the beginning, and as you get closer to the race, you start doing more speed work. You know, it's not a terrible approach. There's nothing really kind of outstandingly wrong with it, but it can just be so much more productive than just building towards a big event in that way. Ideally, you'd be hitting all your bases all the time, and then you just kind of increase the emphasis on one aspect, kind of depending on where you are in the training phases in your build towards your event. So really, it shouldn't be a case of it's winter, I do long base training and that's it. It's summer, I've done all my base, now it's time to kind of do all the speed and hard work. You know, really it should be doing a bit of everything all the time, and then you just kind of put a greater emphasis on 1 or 2 aspects depending on where you are in the season. So yeah, you might do more base training in the winter, or realistically, you actually won't, because it's much harder to do long, slow, low intensity training in the winter. Actually, you know, you kind of want to do more of that stuff when the weather improves, you can get outside. So yeah, it's not as straightforward as kind of like the traditional model, long and slow, winter and spring, fast and hard as you get towards your event. Yeah, not that simple, I'm afraid. And that's what I mean by the week to week is much more complicated for a triathlete and a cyclist. And how you develop a macro plan, an overarching plan, also depends on an athlete's medium to long term plans. You know, their life plans. Are they moving house? Have they got about traveling, a really busy work period? You know, building that into a training plan is really important, and working with it rather than against it. So for instance, if someone's traveling for 2 or 3 weeks on end, you're obviously not going to do long big miles, and so you have to kind of build around that. Am I to do that before, or would it be more beneficial to do it after that period of traveling, and focus on speed work whilst they're away, short sessions that they can do in a hotel gym sort of thing. So yeah, it's not as straightforward as that kind of traditional model of just increasing volume up until race day. So to be more helpful, a general framework that we kind of use is we employ a 14-week build to a goal event. Any more than that, and we find that athletes start to resent the training and just want it all to be over, basically. Obviously before then we're still training hard and you know, doing what we need to, and we have a specific focus, we have phases where we focus on particular things, but it's less religiously focused, and the volume is relatively consistent. You know, we get to a certain level and we kind of hold in terms of volume, but within that, we're focusing on specific things. Has to be a level at which obviously we could then build quite nicely from in that 14 weeks. But once you get to that 14-week build, every week has a specific purpose. So you might have a key week, which is low intensity but very high volume. Then you might have what we call transition weeks, which is lower volume, but we up the intensity. And then also event-specific weeks where we focus in on race preparation. So lots of brick sessions, transition practice. And yeah, that's kind of the rough sort of framework we use. And then included within that are those key weeks that I talked about earlier. There to build confidence, get those locked into the athlete's diary so that you know they're going to have at least a certain amount of weeks where they have really good quality focused training, and they're going to feel good after it. Okay, another sort of nuance of our sort of framework is particularly if we're looking after long course triathletes, sort of half Ironman, about 2 weeks out from their goal event, we'll have a super short primer race. So sprint, super sprint. And this is basically to get them to get their game faces on, just to make sure they've experienced the stress of a race in relatively close proximity to their goal event, and also get them to get their bloody kit sorted. And so many times before we kind of started employing this sort of structure, when I was kind of just first starting out as a coach, athletes would, get a bike service planned in for like the week before an event. Something would go wrong, or they'd mess up their saddle height or something silly, and then they're rushing around, trying to find a mechanic when they're at the event venue or something. So getting all that stuff sorted, all the kit, any last minute additions, any last minute changes to nutrition, get all that done in a short primer race a couple of weeks out from the main race. It's a really good confidence builder, and obviously being so short, it's not going to do much in the way of physiological damage. Nothing that they can't recover from as they move into their taper. Obviously you'd also strategically place other events, and hopefully quite a few. I'll talk about why I think racing regularly is important in a minute. But yeah, you strategically place other events. So if you're doing a half Ironman or Ironman, you put in some sprints, some Olympic distance races, because it's just really good having those kind of warm-up races where you kind of get used to all the stress of racing. And it just means that when it comes to race day, and I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, you can't just get there and you're much more adept at dealing with stuff, rather than, oh my God, I've never experienced this before, and you just start freaking out and make poor decisions. So yeah, that's just a quick little message as to why making sure you got regular races planned in can really help. So that's kind of everything I was going to say on the macro plan. So far we talked about basic approach, and we talked about the macro plan, the general kind of framework. I'm just going to have a quick pause, maybe to catch my own breath. But if anyone's got any questions on any of that, please do feel free to shout. Various methods of doing so: unmute yourself on Zoom, or use the chat feature in Zoom, use the chat in RGT, or comment on the live stream. Any of those methods, very welcome, as I just regather myself. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, Geth. So the question was for the live stream, basically, is it a good idea to do 2 recovery sessions in one day, potentially all different disciplines? So my advice would be to stick to the one. I personally don't set recovery runs for athletes. I've only dealt with maybe 2 or 3 athletes that are good enough runners to properly keep their heart rate low enough for a recovery run. Any active recovery I generally set on the turbo, or sometimes in the pool. Yeah, because it's so much easier to manage it, because actually active recovery, guys, it's quite specific. So on the bike at least, you want to keep your power below about 55% of FTP. So as you're doing this right now, if it's your active recovery, just halve your FTP and look to try and stay at that power level. And that's where you perhaps want to turn down the trainer difficulty, etc. But yeah, I think, yeah, keeping it to the 1 session, and probably going bike or swim, probably more bike, I think, because, you know, when it comes to active recovery, it's, you know, it's you want it to be as little fap as possible, really. And when it, just quickly again on active recovery, make sure it's less than an hour, and as I say, super low intensity. You know, for as an example, for a run, you know, you're potentially looking at sort of sub 100 beats per minute, which is actually really hard to do. And I can't do it. I'd never do active recovery runs. I'm just not good enough runner. But I can easily do that on the bike. Not so much now. I'm puffing, even though I'm at recovery level in terms of my power. Yeah, well, yeah, it would. I doubt if I doubt, you know, it's basically when it comes to active recovery, the reason it's so specific is because if you're working too hard, you won't recover at an optimal rate. And then conversely, if you're not working at high enough level, you're not actually going to be stressing yourself enough to kind of elicit physiological adaptation. So if you're not careful, you kind of find yourself in this sort of weird middle ground where you're not really recovering optimally, but you're also kind of getting a bit more fatigued. And, you know, it's just, I think if you can avoid it, you know, yeah, and that's kind of one of the hardest things to do, is actually allow yourself those times where you really allow yourself to chill. Particularly, yeah, I've moved out of London now, but I used to live in London, and you know, I go out for a little active recovery ride around Regent's Park every now and then, and I see the guys in their speed suits whipping around Regent's Park, and I'll be like, oh, I can't allow that. And before you know it, you find yourself in a drag race with someone that's dressed as a poor man's Power Ranger. But yeah, so you've got to try and take the ego out of it, basically. But active recovery is hugely beneficial. But yeah, it's just got to be at the right level. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. It wasn't too much teacher talk. So I'll just quickly pause again in case anyone else has got any questions. Remember the various different ways you can ask questions if you're minded to. Okay. Right. Okay, well, basically what I've got next in terms of my notes is just some kind of key advice when it comes to approaching multi-sport training plans, or just multi-sport training, full stop, really. I spoke earlier about profiling, making sure you know your strengths and your weaknesses before you even start, because unless you know that in relatively high depth, in significant depth, how do you I question how you know what to do, basically. And you need to know what you're good at and what you're not good at, and use that information to blend your approach. So just an example, we have guys who are excellent runners, and really, in terms of the amount of volume they're doing, they'll probably get diminishing returns in terms of their run training, because ideally we need to really ramp up their volume to kind of make a significant improvement. So they're not going to plateau, but their improvements are going to be they're not going to be exponential. Whereas they have areas where we can make really good, easy gains just by focusing on them, whilst maintaining that run fitness. And so they can make big time up just by a few blocks of focusing on the stuff that they don't really like. And one other thing is, you might actually, by focusing on your weaknesses, with triathlon, the way it works in terms of three back-to-back, is you might actually see an improvement in your strength by working on your weaknesses. I know that might seem counterintuitive, but let's put it this way. Triathlon is all about getting within fighting distance of the finish. It's all about kind of managing your effort until you can really strike that line and gun it on the run in the final 5, 10k or whatever event you're doing. That's really the goal of triathlon. Okay, unless you're in kind of draft legal elite level racing, it's triathlon racing is actually, I don't want to say boring, because it's not. It's great fun, but it's quite simple. I think it's perhaps the best way of putting it. It's all about being as efficient as possible, so that you're in as good a position as possible when it comes to the run. So again, as an example, particularly swimming tends to be the most common area where people aren't the best, because particularly if you're British, we don't get taught to swim properly. It's just that simple. And so if your swim fitness is at a consistently decent level, it has two effects. Firstly, if your swim fitness is decent, you're going to recover from your swim sessions more quickly, which then means you're going to have more energy going into your other training sessions. You're just fitter, you're quicker at recovery, you're going to be more fresh if your swim fitness is at a decent level. Whereas opposed to going to every swim session, you go once every 3 weeks, and it's a horrible session, you struggle, and then that fatigue that you build struggling through that what should be easy swim set, that will overflow into your other sessions and harm their quality. Okay, so that's one way that working on a weakness can improve your other disciplines. You simply just have more juice in the tank. The second way is the swim in particular. That's the first thing. If you're efficient at that, you're gonna have more energy for the bike and the run. It's just that straightforward, really. And so I get really frustrated when I hear athletes say something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm just trying to get through the swim. Not that bothered about it. I know I can do the distance." I find that super frustrating, because if they were better at the swimming, oh man, they'd be better at everything else. They'd have a better bike because they're fresher. They have a better run because that has a knock-on effect. And so don't look at your weaknesses as something to kind of gloss over. They can actually make your strengths even more of a strength to give due attention. So that's the first sort of key bit of advice. Make sure you don't just neglect your weaknesses. They can actually help improve your strengths and the stuff that you do enjoy. Second piece of advice is pick appropriate events. We talked in the basic training plan session about doing a proper assessment of your time availability. Make sure you do that, guys, before you spend hundreds of pounds on that Ironman race or what have you. And make sure you check what you have scheduled around that that big event. I've seen it on quite a few occasions where a new athlete will come to me and, you know, they'll have this race that they've already signed up to, and then they'll probably have like a week's holiday in like the Caribbean or something the week before, which I don't think I need to go into why that's not ideal. There's tapering and then there's tapering. that's at the least wise end of the spectrum. Getting banged up on pina coladas the week before an Ironman event, yeah, great fun, but likely to say hello again. Actually, I was going to say something really disgusting then, but I'll just stop. I have to keep reminding myself that I'm not talking to our squad athletes who hear me say all manner of things and it's not recorded. Yeah, so make sure you pick an appropriate event. Yeah, you've got time either side of it to build and then recover from, and that you haven't got kind of major events that will affect it. It seems like such a patronising thing to say, but honestly, it's such a silly thing to get wrong if you do, and all for the sake of, because I want to do this event because it's somewhere nice. Ultimately, this stuff is meant to be enjoyable, and I query whether it's enjoyable if you're not properly prepared. So yeah, that's the second piece. Next piece is, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, if you live in Northern Europe, one of my biggest pieces of advice is, do not do an early season Ironman, or depending on your level, do not do an early season half Ironman. Okay, do not do it. It is so hard to train during the British winter, and it's only now that the open water venues are starting to open up. And I swam last weekend, and I was chiseling ice off the windshield before I went over to where I go to swim, and they said 9 degrees. There was no way in hell it was 9 degrees. I had to put my face, it took me about 5 minutes of putting my face in the water, swimming a bit, putting my face in the water, and doing water polo swimming until I could hold my face in the water. So guys, if you're thinking about that early season triathlon somewhere fancy, just have a think. Can I actually train for it? Because I tell you, training through a British winter, doing really high volume training is tough. Okay, really tough. There's just not the light for it. It's cold, unless you're really happy, unless you've got like a cyclocross bike or a mountain bike, it's hard to get any cycling volume in. So that for me is kind of like my big lesson learned over the last couple of years is early season. So when I talk about early season, I'm talking kind of May time, beginning of June, doing a big sort of half iron distance race, unless you're particularly experienced. And that is the one thing I'd say. The more experienced you are, the quicker you can kind of ramp and look after yourself. But if you're inexperienced, do not do it. Just don't do it to yourself. It rarely works nicely. And I like to think I'm pretty good at what I do, but I can't turn a 6-week, ramp to an Ironman into a 14-week ramp, which it should have been. Okay, so I think that's one big piece of advice. Pick your event carefully and just don't do an early season one. I know the thought of people often don't want to train hard over the summer because they want to chill out and enjoy the summer, which is 100% fair enough. But doing it through the winter is even worse, trust me. Anyway, that's that one. Again, that's a rant. I've got 3 subjects I can do an hour's rant on, which is good for future content. Next up, I talked about that, included key weeks, particularly for those big brick sessions. That's when you want to make sure you've got those locked in, so you don't approach the final weeks of your training and realise you haven't actually done much in the way of significant brick sessions. Just on brick sessions, guys, what we tend to do is, as soon as it gets kind of warm enough, we put in brick sessions on a weekly basis for our athletes. It's one sport, 3 disciplines, which means you need to be constantly kind of moving, in particular from bike to run, for a multi-sport training plan. Okay, so another piece of advice on the brick sessions, guys, is we generally set our athletes a structured run, rather than just go and say brick run after your bike session, go run for half an hour, nice and easy. Primarily because those sessions never get done. So we always give a structured run with a very clear focus, you know, race pacing session, some tempo efforts, whatever. I think whenever you do a brick session, make sure it has a very clear objective and you know why you're doing it, because that's where the old motivation is tempted. If you're doing it on a turbo trainer, doing your bike session on a turbo trainer, and you look outside and it's cold and it's windy, that brick session is not going to get done unless you've got a very specific reason for doing it. Okay, and yeah, so do them regularly. Make sure your brick runs are structured or have a very clear focus. Otherwise, I put money on you not doing it. Okay, what's up next in our key advice section? Talks about brick sessions. Yes, make sure you manage your intensity carefully. Now, this is one of the really challenging parts, and this is an area where I think guys like me earn their money. Managing intensity, one key kind of bit of advice there is just avoid back-to-back high intensity sessions in a day. Super straightforward, but actually when you do that, when you have that rule, suddenly it makes fitting everything in quite difficult, which brings me on to my next point. But yeah, try to avoid back-to-back high intensity sessions. Otherwise you'll just overload yourself with fatigue. Even if they're different disciplines, guys, you're still stressing your cardiovascular system, still accumulating fatigue through high intensity. So avoid that, and that goes to multi-sport or cycling plans. Avoid 2 high intensity sessions in the same day. What was that next point I was going to make? Yeah, don't stick to a rigid weekly structure. So as I said, if you can't do back-to-back high intensity sessions, suddenly your week might become quite challenging. So guys, you don't have to do everything every week. We love our weekly structures and doing things the same day each week. We love control, takes away anxiety, but with a triathlon plan, there's always too much to do. So don't try and fit everything in every week. Okay, allow it to flow over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, and then that way make sure you kind of get all that important stuff done. Try not to stick to really rigid weekly structures, because they often fall apart, and that's when kind of the confidence drops a little bit. We're looking for consistency, not perfection, remember, and that doesn't mean consistently doing the same sessions each week. It means consistently over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, hitting those important sessions as regularly as you can. Yes, so you don't have to cover everything. Race regularly. Okay, triathlon often for people is more of a lifestyle, and some people are actually quite reluctant to race. I tend to see kind of 2 types of athlete: those that love racing, and you kind of have to stop and booking stuff, and then those guys who actually don't really like racing that much. They like building to a big event and having a big blowout, and then enjoying themselves because it's more of a lifestyle to them. So to those people that perhaps don't like racing that much and it's more about the lifestyle, I still encourage you to race pretty regularly. So as I said earlier, racing regularly, it just gets rid of all the anxiety, all those stupid little silly things. What happened to me last season, I just can't get a rear bottle cage to fit my TT bike that works properly. I had a warm-up race, the whole bloody thing just snapped in half. Get all that stuff out the way, so when you get to your race day, your main event, you've got everything lined up and you're happy that everything's working. It makes such a big difference. Okay, key advice, what's left? Yeah, I've spoken about swimming. Common mistake there is to think that swimming is just something to get through. I've spoken about that. It's important for efficiency and making sure you have more energy for the bike and the run. Train with your nutrition and hydration. We've all heard that one. But basically, guys, your gut is trainable, but it can take 2 or 3 months before it gets really used to whatever it is eating. Basically, it gets super complex, guys, but basically it's to do with your gut bacteria. Your gut bacteria, the populations of different bacteria actually changes according to what you eat. So if you're eating certain things more regularly, certain bacteria will be in the ascendancy and you'll be able to deal with it. There's a really good book on this stuff, which if you're interested I can refer you to. Can't quite remember the name of it at the moment. Yeah, so train with your nutrition, give yourself time. It can be very trainable. When it comes to managing your training, look for patterns. So for instance, if you're consistently missing swim sessions, track that. Why is that the case? Is it because you hate the pool you're going to? That's a common one. Find a pool you do like going to, even if it means travelling further. Don't expect to improve exponentially across all the disciplines at the same time. You'll love one discipline for a time, you'll hate the others, and that will flip. And then just finally, going back to kind of athlete profiling, make sure you kind of set yourself little goals related to those benchmarks, just to kind of help you get from A to B, help bridge the gap between your current training and your main event. Okay, so that's pretty much it, guys. I think some of you guys might have already finished. We've got about 1 kilometre, yeah, just about 900 meters left of the course. So I'll end my chat there, but I'll stick around, of course, in case anyone's got any questions. There's a lot to cover there, some of it in questionable depth, but hopefully enough nuggets of information for any kind of budding multi-sport athletes to take away. Yeah, so I'll just stick around if anyone's got any questions. Just remember, guys, if you're ever interested in working with us as a coaching team, you can set up a free coach consultation. If you go to our coaching page, you can set up a coach consultation, just have a chat with us and see whether what we offer is potentially right for you. But otherwise, guys, we're always here to answer questions, so feel free to drop us an email or DM us on social media. But otherwise, I'll stop talking now and invite any questions, if there are any. Cheers, guys. Cheers, Gareth. Thanks, Mike. All right, guys. Right, I've got about 300 meters left. I'm going to finish this course for once. Normally, I always finish before the end. But I've got about just over 2 minutes left of the feed. So remember, you can always hit us with questions on RGT, or use the comment sections on the live stream if you're watching that. Otherwise, guys, if you're interested in more training plan chat, I really recommend having a look at our recent sessions on training plan basics, and also we did another session on rider profiling, which is where we talked about figuring out your strengths and weaknesses as a rider. You can employ a very similar approach to triathlon in terms of benchmarking, or as I said earlier in the session, we've got athlete profiling plans for sale, always on the plug. But there you go, guys, hope you enjoyed that ride. Any last questions, happy to field them. Otherwise, go have yourselves a lovely evening or a lovely day, depending on where you are. Cheers, Sylvain. Thanks, Mike. Cheers, everyone.